Hi, and welcome to Reviewing with Mrs. Wages. Today's topic is cellular respiration. Let's get started. The overall purpose of cellular respiration is to convert the chemical energy stored in glucose into a more usable form. And that, of course, is ATP. Now, this process is most efficiently performed when cells not only have lots of available glucose, but plenty of oxygen as well. So what kind of organisms carry out cellular respiration? Well, you probably know that plants carry out photosynthesis, and you might already know that animals carry out respiration, but you might not know that plants also carry out cellular respiration. In fact, both plants and animals respire. And why is that? Well, because both of them need ATP to stay alive. So both organisms, plants and animals, carry out cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is really a series of chemical events happening within the cell. The process begins in the cytoplasm with glycolysis and ends in the mitochondria if oxygen is readily available. If oxygen is not available, fermentation in the cytoplasm occurs. However, you should know that the mitochondria is way more efficient at producing ATP than fermentation. Let's look at the big picture of cellular respiration, which begins with the molecule of glucose. Now, glucose is readily available in the cytoplasm if an animal, like us, eats plenty of food with glucose in it. Or if you're a plant, you would simply make your glucose and it would be in the cytoplasm after photosynthesis is complete. And this glucose that we either consumed as heterotrophs or produced as autotrophs during photosynthesis will undergo a series of chemical reactions called glycolysis. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of our cells, and in doing so makes three main products. ATP, which is usable energy for the cell right off the bat. It also makes two molecules of pyruvate, also known as pyruvic acid, and two molecules of NADH. And if you remember, NADH is an electron carrier, which carries electrons and hydrogens to other places in the cell. Let's take a closer look at glycolysis in the cytoplasm. It begins with one molecule of glucose. And to get the process starting, we're going to use a couple molecules of usable energy in the form of ATP. When the process is done, we will have generated two molecules of NADH and two molecules of pyruvate. Besides those, we'll also generate four molecules of ATP. But remember, we had to burn two molecules of ATP at the beginning, so at the end we really only have a net gain of two molecules of ATP from glycolysis. Now let's go back to the overview of cellular respiration. So what determines the fate of pyruvate and NADH, where they'll end up in cellular respiration? Will they stay in the cytoplasm and carry out fermentation, or will they enter the mitochondria to do aerobic respiration? Well, that all depends on the availability of oxygen. If oxygen is in short supply, then pyruvate and NADH will stay in the cytoplasm and carry out fermentation, which of course is an anaerobic process. It doesn't require oxygen. And depending on what kind of an organism you are, you might carry out alcohol fermentation, like yeast and other microorganisms do. Or if you're an animal like we are, then you'll carry out lactic acid fermentation. But neither type of fermentation processes directly makes ATP. But there is a benefit. The benefit of either type of fermentation is that it releases NAD positive back to the cytoplasm. And that NAD positive is necessary to keep glycolysis running and producing the bit of ATP it can until oxygen is more readily available. And if oxygen is available, pyruvate and NADH will head to the mitochondria to carry out aerobic respiration. This includes conversion of pyruvate, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. And the beauty of the aerobic pathway is that it makes lots of ATP from that glucose. If you look more closely at the Krebs cycle, you'll see that it's composed of two main steps. Kind of a linear process, which is the conversion of pyruvate. The pyruvate was produced during glycolysis. And then that's followed by the actual Krebs cycle down here. And both of these take place within the matrix of the mitochondria. In the first phase, pyruvate from glycolysis is converted into three main products: carbon dioxide, NADH, and acetyl-CoA. Carbon dioxide is a waste gas which we animals will exhale. The NADH will go to the electron transport chain, and the acetyl-CoA will actually enter into the Krebs cycle to begin the process. And remember, the glycolysis produces two pyruvates for every one glucose molecule, so this will happen twice. The Krebs cycle will turn twice per molecule of glucose, and this diagram shows the totals after 2 turns of the cycle. These 2 NADHs were produced during the conversion of pyruvate. 2 of the carbon dioxides were produced there as well. The rest of the molecules, the 6 NADHs, the 2 FADH2s, and the 2 ATPs, and 4 of the 6 carbon dioxides are all produced during the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle. So where do all these electron carriers go? Well, that brings us to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria and makes use of FADH2 and NADH. If oxygen is available at the end of the chain, each electron carrier will drop off its 2 electrons and hydrogen ions. As the electrons move down the chain, they will power the pumps to actively transport hydrogen out of the matrix. Oxygen is waiting at the end of the chain to collect the tired electrons as they exit this pathway. Oxygen will now become negatively charged and very attracted to the 2 positively charged hydrogen ions. And this, of course, is how water is formed during respiration. Meanwhile, hydrogen is building up on the outside and will naturally diffuse back into the matrix through a molecule called ATP synthase. The action of the hydrogen moving through the ATP synthase brings together an ADP and an inorganic phosphate to form ATP. The overall equation for cellular respiration is as follows. C6H12O6 plus 6O2 gets turned into 6CO2 plus 6H2O. And as these products are made, a bunch of ATP is also produced. If you can look at the diagram, you can see that this takes place over a series of steps. It begins with glucose in the cytoplasm, which enters glycolysis, makes a little bit of ATP itself. The products of glycolysis head to the mitochondria. Pyruvate will be converted into acetyl-CoA, which enters the Krebs cycle. That process will generate a little bit of carbon dioxide and some NADH. The Krebs cycle will make use of the acetyl-CoA. It will also produce carbon dioxide, some ATP, and a bunch of electron carriers, FADH2 and NADH. All of the electron carriers produced in each of these equations will head to the electron transport chain, where they will undergo further changes to produce a bunch of ATP molecules. And in the meantime, water is also produced. That's all for now. I hope this helped, and as always, happy studying!